Hello and welcome to the Emergency Temporary Standard Training, Part 2, Questions and Revisions. These are the things that we're going to be covering today. We're going to be addressing questions and comments from the previous training. We're also going to be going over exposure risk level and re-emphasizing critical points. These are the requirements for all exposure risk levels. Regardless of whether you are low, medium, high, or very high, all of these apply to you. These are legally mandated by the Emergency Temporary Standard, so we have a legal obligation to enforce these. The first one is social distancing. This is staying at least 6 feet away from all other people, even if you're wearing a mask. Masks need to be worn at all times in the workplace, except when at designated workstations with social distance, barriers, or engineering controls in place. Access to public areas that are commonly used by multiple people, such as the break room or the copier room, places like that will be closed or controlled. We also need to ensure that the mandatory requirements of applicable executive orders and orders of public health emergency are abided by everyone. And employees who are experiencing any symptoms that could be considered to be COVID, whether it's a cough, fever, stuff like that, they will be designated as suspected to be infected. If you have anything that could potentially be construed as COVID, you are suspected until you have a test result that confirms otherwise. Employees who think or know that they have COVID must stay at home until they are cleared to return to work. This is very, very important. You are not allowed to come to work if you think or know that you have COVID. If you test positive, you absolutely cannot come into work, and you must report it to your employer within 24 hours. Now, this is the definition for the lower exposure risk level. I'll let you pause and read if you would like to. And here we have the medium exposure risk level definition. Now, for the medium exposure risk level, all employees must follow all practices for lower exposure risk level, which are masks, social distancing, telecommuting when possible, and implementing physical barriers when possible. Masks and physical distancing are non-negotiable. Those are legal mandates by the Emergency Temporary Standard, so we legally have to enforce these. In addition to these actions, medium employees must also go through pre-screening, which means that they must have their temperatures checked each day, and they must complete this training. Now, the difference between the medium exposure risk level definition and the lower exposure risk level definition is more than minimal occupational contact. More than minimal occupational contact means any contact within 6 feet for more than 10 minutes total per day. I'm going to go over the requirements for the lower exposure risk level real quick, and then after this, I'll touch on the additional requirements that medium must also do. So the first one for lower is to implement physical barriers when possible. This can mean plastic guards or impervious walls, any sort of wall that can be placed between individuals to separate them. This can also be office walls. So if you are inside of your office with 4 walls surrounding you, then that is a great physical barrier. We can also use the plexiglass guards, which can be full body length, or they can be a shorter length to be used on tabletops. These are to be used as necessary and as practical in the workplace. The next one is mandatory face coverings. These face coverings must be used at all times when 2 or more people are present in a single room, even when each person is at a distance of greater than 6 feet, unless barriers or other engineering controls are present and sufficient to prevent exposures. This could be like the physical barriers, the plexiglass walls, as we mentioned in the previous slide. The third requirement for lower exposure risk level is working from home and telecommuting when possible. This can be having meetings over Zoom or over the phone. This can mean, taking a laptop home and, working on, if you have a day that just consists of writing, do it at home. This is also something that is done on an as needed and as practical basis. So if you are able to work from home, go ahead and do so. But obviously, some people cannot do their jobs at home. So this is, if you can, do it. Next, the physical distancing. This is another one that is not on an as needed basis. This is an all the time basis. We are legally required to enforce this as well as the masks. We need to keep at least 6 feet away from each other. And as you can see in this fun picture, that is at least one alligator. So keep one alligator away from everyone else at all times, even when wearing masks. Now we're going to touch on the requirements for the medium exposure risk level. Medium exposure risk level also needs to abide by the requirements for the lower exposure risk level, which are masks, physical distancing, working from home when you can, and implementing physical barriers when possible. In addition to those, you also need to do this training, and you also need to get your temperature checked before each workday or before showing up for your shift or walking into work. Your temperature needs to be checked. You can either check it yourself or you can have Peggy or Joyce check it. Since there's it's kind of vague who is just low and who is medium, and some people have jobs that kind of fluctuate between the two, everybody's going to have to abide by the same requirements. It's more simple that way if everybody is held to the same standards. Everybody should be taking their temperature at the start of each day, and everybody should be completing this training. Now, this is a list of the job tasks that have been determined to classify as medium exposure risk hazard. Some of these jobs may also classify as lower, depending on different factors and different situations. The first one is the lab. Now, even though much of the time is spent in front of a hood, there is a significant amount of activity that is not at the hood, such as moving samples around, sharing computers, walking to the sink, interacting with other people, etc. There are no physical barriers in the lab, and there are frequently activities where it is impractical to wear masks. Therefore, the lab is considered medium exposure. The next is work in customer settings. This includes in-person training and indoor environmental quality. Any training that's done virtually, like over Zoom, that is considered low, but any in-person training is going to be considered medium. Meetings also are considered medium exposure risk level, but only if the meetings are held in person. Like I said before, anything that's held as a conference call, as a Zoom meeting, or anything that's virtual is going to be considered low exposure risk level, but in-person meetings are medium. Next is field work, and this one is a little tricky. This can kind of be both low and medium, much like some of the others. Field staff that do indoor environmental quality and the field technicians who are doing indoor and outdoor construction and who are in a customer's facility or at their location. Any work that's done where other people are around or in the same vicinity, that is going to be medium. Any field work that's done alone or solo is perfectly fine. And next, reception. Reception sometimes encounters clients and delivery people, and currently their offices are located in an area where people frequently need to walk past. So they are going to be considered medium. They could be considered low depending on the job task performed, but we would prefer to be overprotective rather than underprotective. And review of other companies has shown that they consider their reception to be considered medium. So we're going to go ahead and consider our reception to also be considered medium. Now, these are the three main points that I really want to reiterate in this presentation. The first one is to wear a mask. You always need to be wearing a mask when you are within 6 feet of another person. Multiple people in one room should always be wearing a mask unless they are physically separated or mechanically protected by air filtration hoods. And when I say physically separated, I mean there's a barrier and there's no open space between them. When masks are not needed, is when people are working individually within a separate office. So if you are within your own office, which has a door, there are 4 walls around you, that is when you don't have to wear a mask. The next one is social distancing. This means staying 6 feet apart from one another, even when you're wearing a mask. If you are in the same room and you are not separated by any walls, you need to be wearing a mask. These two in particular are the most important. These are legally required regardless of your status, whether you are low or medium. It doesn't matter what the situation is. We are legally required to enforce these two, so this absolutely needs to be done. The last one is to take your temperature. Now this is a requirement only for the medium, but like I said before, we're treating everyone the same. And since it's kind of complicated, whether who's low and who's medium, everybody should go ahead and take their temperature each day. Doesn't take that long, so you can monitor your own temperature. You can have Peggy or Joyce take it, just as long as you are aware of what your temperature is at the start of each workday. If it is above 100.4, you need to leave work. Don't come in. Now I'm going to briefly go over the action plan for what to do if an employee is suspected or known to be infected with COVID-19. If an employee is suspected to be infected, this means that an employee is feeling sick and presenting symptoms similar to those of COVID-19, or they are presenting a fever during or upon arrival at work. Now, in this case, what should happen is the sick employee should do all the things that are on the right-hand side. This is follow the appropriate protocol for returning to work. We're going to handle this on a case-by-case basis, so contact management will go over that. Next, they need to stay home from work and immediately notify their supervisor, and also contact your doctor and follow their guidance on what to do. On the left-hand side, this is what the employer and the rest of the office should do. We should sanitize the office, sanitize the employee's work area, monitor symptoms and status of other employees, and generally just monitor other employees for an outbreak. Next, if an employee is known to be infected with COVID-19, meaning they have received a positive test result, what the sick employee or the infected employee should do on the right-hand side is must report the positive test within 24 hours. You must report it to management. Next is mandatory quarantine. The employee must stay home and quarantine. Also, follow the protocol for returning to work. We will discuss on a case-by-case basis on how to return to work appropriately. On the left, this is what the employer and the office should do. Sanitize the office with a particular focus on the sick employee's workspace. Follow the appropriate protocol for sanitizing as suggested by the CDC. Management must also notify the building owner, employees, and anybody who has been in the building in the past week within 24 hours of learning that there is a positive test. Also, a COVID-19 test will be offered for all employees, and employees will be further encouraged to work from home. Thank you for listening to this presentation. That is all. We are not expected to do another presentation after this, but we can if requested. Please email me to confirm that you have finished the presentation. And if you have any questions, concerns, issues, what have you, please go ahead and email me. And I will try to get back to you and answer them as well as possible. My email is mstokes@stokesea.com. Thank you.